I made psychology dope. Mental muscle. Yeah. Hey, what is up, y'all? Mental Muscle Coach here. I'm really excited for this video. I've been wanting to dissect David Goggins' psychology for a while now. When I was doing my master's degree, one of the things that I focused on in my thesis was I wanted to look at people who are the most successful at a particular domain of life. But one of the biggest things that I realized is when I was looking at like the most successful people, the people who really thrived in a particular domain, yeah, there was a few elements that you could take away from them and, generally apply them to the rest of us. But when I looked at these hyper successful people, these people who had achieved massive accomplishments that were almost inconceivable, when I looked at the broad scope of these people, I actually saw that it was individuation that made them excellent. And now what I mean is, all of these people who are at the peak of their respective domain, whatever it was, you could see that these people had really honed in on what made them different, and they were able to specialize their focuses on their strengths. They were able to really specialize their energy and their devotion to those things and those aspects of themselves that were really specific and precise to who they were. And so as a result, I wanted to start this little series, if you will, and look at these different people, look at some hyper successful people, and figure out what we could glean from them and who they are as individuals, starting with David Goggins. So while most of us are probably familiar with him, David Goggins is the author of the book Can't Hurt Me. He was at one point over 300 pounds, and he became this very shredded ultra marathon runner who was also a Navy SEAL. And by the way, he's got a fear of the water, and yet this mofo decided to become a Navy SEAL. He in 2013, he beat the 24-hour pull-up record by doing 4,030 pull-ups in 17 hours and 6 minutes. He's completed over 70 ultra distance marathons, but in many ways, he comes off as a freaking psycho a lot of times. But it's a really powerful thing when we stop and look at who he is and how he's actually been able to model his thinking in order to achieve these types of things. When you take into account all these different elements, he's an ultra distance marathoner with over 70 marathons. He's done all the things that are in relation to becoming a Navy SEAL. He's now an author. He's, been in research, all these amazing accomplishments. But when you look at his history, this was an African-American man who grew up in a racist area. I believe it was in Indiana, but at the time he was in a city where he dealt with a lot of racism. He grew up in poverty when his mother left his abusive father. His father was essentially a pimp and a business owner, but highly abusive to the kids, himself and his mom. He dealt with a learning disability because his dad didn't believe in school. And then later on in life, he gets to the point where he's over 300 pounds. So with all of these limitations, how did he become who he is now? And how has he managed to string together all these massive wins? That's what I want to dissect. The unique psychology of David Goggins and how he consciously wired himself to be able to get himself out of that lower state and be able to optimize the way he navigates the world, and essentially is freaking killing it now. The first thing that I wanted to mention is that he disidentifies with his intelligence. Now, stop and think how many of us, particularly people that, follow me and just a lot of us who are into the philosophies, the sciences, maybe you work a technical job, a lot of us who maybe, even if you don't tell yourself, oh, I'm super intelligent or oh, I'm smart, you have an area of your life where you may very likely feel a high level of proficiency or a high level of competence, And so when we have that self-perception, obviously that's important because that confidence helps us go forward and do things. But when we look at the context of David Goggins, we notice that David Goggins, especially those of you who again have listened to his content, he isn't someone who's always talking about how smart he is. And as a matter of fact, he talks about the opposite. He talks about the fact that he has a learning disability. He talks about the fact that he's not the person that can pass a test, easily. He has to do an insane amount of studying in order to overcome those limitations. He talks about, not only the fact that education was something painful in his past growing up because he wasn't going to school very often since his dad didn't believe in education in school. But on top of that, he describes how that was a constant roadblock in his life. But here's an area where he utilized some reframing in order to make that powerful. You see, when you have someone that is disidentified from their intelligence, what does that mean? It's going to help them to disidentify from the manifestations of their intelligence. So the manifestations of anxiety, the manifestations of the inner critic, the manifestations of their mind chatter when it's talking to them. Imagine, perfect example, the first time that he ran 100 miles because he was getting into ultramarathoning, and he ran that 100 miles. It was around mile 70 that he experienced some form of fracture in his feet. And so he essentially had to complete those other 30 miles of that 100-mile marathon with fractured bones in his feet. That's utterly insane, but you ask yourself, how was he able to do it? Think about if you were in a scenario like that, how you would manage to push through that in order to essentially say to yourself, I can run another 30 miles with broken fucking feet. Like, imagine what you would have to conceptualize in order to achieve that. But with him, he's tapped into something very interesting, that when that mind chatter would arise, telling him he needs to stop, telling him, oh my goodness, do you feel this pain? Are you crazy? We can't do this, give up. Because of the fact that he had already disidentified from the perception of being intelligent. I mean, obviously, it's not good for one to see themselves as dumb or to see themselves as unintelligent, but you can see how he utilized this in his own specialized way of moving forward. He was able to see the mind as an entity or a separate entity from himself. And we stop and we realize that's actually the case. That when our mind is running, when our mind is thinking, when our mind is performing, if you get that 100 on that test and everyone else in your class gets an 85, we see our mental function as part of us because of the fact that it is in many ways given us positive reinforcement. That, we see that we use our mind to do so many things. But with him, he's like, in many ways, he saw his mind as an enemy. He saw his mind as something that was in his way because he struggled intellectually. And so that helped him to disidentify. And so he turned that weakness into a strength. And that's one of the key areas that he's been able to cultivate toughness. He's been able to cultivate grit through that disidentification from his mental limitation. Because he realized that if I go beyond mental limitation, my body can go way farther. Number two, and this is really interesting, is that he actually utilizes this strategy of creating an alter ego. And now, mind you, we talk about alter ego as if it's this nebulous concept that's not actually real. But in fact, there's a real science behind the strategic cultivation of an alter ego. When we look at the late Kobe Bryant and how he would step onto the court and he was the Black Mamba. That wasn't just a nickname. He cultivated an alter ego. When we look at David Goggins, he talks about when he is entering into some type of challenge where he needs to go beyond David Goggins' capacity, he turns into Goggins. And he describes the experience of being in Goggins' mindset and the differentiation between David Goggins and Goggins, the difference in their goals, the difference in their empathy and their focus. All these things change because Goggins is so one-dimensionally fixated on completing the goal and is capable of doing it. Now, this is a science. If you go and look up the work of Todd Herman, he's helped so many hyper-successful businessmen, hyper-successful, ultra athletes and things like that in order to cultivate alter egos. And now, mind you, there's a number of things that people employ when they're trying to cultivate alter egos. They have these different terms like using your artifact enhancer, where they might have something they put on where that represents the dormant of the alter ego. And because that thing, like let's say if it's this necklace, if this necklace was my artifact enhancer, it would mean that when I put this necklace on, I put that on as a symbol to myself that I'm stepping into the alter ego. And because of the fact that the person only uses that piece, or if I was only wearing this necklace when I was adorning the alter ego, it actually causes the mind to anchor the identity traits that you're trying to manifest in this alter ego. It will anchor those traits into that artifact enhancer, or into, in this example, this necklace. Now, number three, and this is the one I'm gonna leave you with, because ultimately, if I were to talk about all these different aspects of David Goggins' psychology, I could be here talking to you for 30 minutes, and I want to keep this at least somewhat succinct. But this one is the most important one, in my opinion, that One of the things that not only has David Goggins communicated, but Dr. Andrew Huberman, the neuroscientist, really expanded on this because he had the opportunity to conduct research on and with David Goggins. That Dr. Huberman said that one of the things that specifies David Goggins, that really makes him different from other individuals, even other Navy SEALs, even other ultramarathoners, is that he's become a master of top-down processing. And what top-down processing simply means is, if you look at the brain, if you think of the brain as a cake, as a multi-layer cake, right? It's like, as we go higher in the layers, you can think of that as higher level or more evolutionarily intelligent thinking. So let's say this is layer 3. This is layer 2, and this is layer 1. On layer 1 is the part of the brain that's the most autonomic. It's the stuff that is just basically keeping us alive, and it's keeping our functions. Layer 1 is responsible for the heart, for controlling our body temperature, for controlling our heartbeat, for controlling our hormones, all those different things. All of those autonomic things that we're not controlling, you can't feel your heart beating right now, can you? It's like, because the things that are facilitating your heartbeat are autonomic. So layer 1 is all of those autonomic things that you're not having to consciously control. Let's call layer 2 your emotional brain. We can refer to this as like the limbic system, just to kind of simplify it a little bit. But it's like, think about this as the emotional brain or the limbic system. And then layer 3 is our most conscious, higher level thinking part of the brain, where we have our intelligence, we can employ our intelligence, we can think about things. If you're doing calculus, you're using layer 3, okay? You're using your cerebral cortex, you're using, that frontal lobe, all those different elements. That's going to be layer 3. So autonomic, emotion, and then higher level thinking. Typically, what'll happen is bottom-up processing. The bottom part of the brain influences the upper part. So let's say, for example, if you're in danger, if you are trapped in an elevator and now that elevator's on fire. First of all, if you're trapped in an elevator and the elevator's on fire, you're probably running out of oxygen. You're probably getting really hot. And so layer 1, the part of the brain that is responsible for keeping you alive, that's doing all these autonomic things, that's controlling your hormones, that's controlling your heartbeat, that's controlling your blood flow, all these things, it's saying, uh-oh, our survival is in danger. So what does it then do? It then influences the limbic system, or the emotional part of the brain. And so now you start having anxiety. Now you start freaking out. Now you start being scared. But then those emotions go up and influence the top level of the brain. So now it's influencing how you're thinking. It's influencing, how you're able to process the situation based upon layers 1 and 2. And as a matter of fact, because layers 1 and 2 are telling you that you're in a state of survival, you're in a state of danger, it's going to change your thinking patterns. If you're trapped in an elevator that's on fire, you're going to think differently than when you're sitting on the beach. Why? Because of bottom-up processing. But what Goggins has learned how to do is has mastered top-down processing. He's learned through the way he thinks, through the way he processes his emotions, through the way he processes the moment and his relationship with what's happening. He's actually able to use his higher level thinking. He's able to use his conscious mind to calm down the emotions when he's doing something like running an ultra marathon, calm down the emotions when he's doing Navy SEAL training and he's a person with a fear of water, and so he's swimming for miles in water even though it's a phobia for him. He's calming down those emotions, and with those emotions calming down, it starts to calm down the level 1 where his hormones are, where his heartbeat is. And so he's literally controlling, he's calming down and controlling the brain in an inverse way from the way that it's typically designed to be able to do. And so top-down processing is such a powerful technique. And it's one of, in my opinion, top-down processing is like the holy grail of emotional regulation, of being able to regulate your nervous system. People who are very, very calm in tough situations, even despite the fact that they might be a person that feels emotions strongly, they might be a person that is susceptible to anxiety, but they're still able to be calm in danger, that's someone with very powerful top-down processing. And so it's these things that differentiate him and allow him to do this crazy ass shit. And I hope y'all enjoyed this. I love y'all. It's Mental Muscle Coach out. Peace.
Yeah. Hey. I'm spitting this medicine right up my mandible. Sip it, it's good for you, better than Theraflu. Even